Welcome to the Beyond the Diagnosis podcast with me, Dr. Kylie. Today's episode is just for you practitioners because we're going to talk about this world of social media. Now, when you look at social media, it can be overwhelming. It is overwhelming because there's so many different platforms. You got TikTok, you got Instagram, you got Facebook, you got LinkedIn, you got Twitter, and then you got the podcast world too, which is where you're all listening, right? So I want to share with you my 3 tips for maximizing social media. Tip number 1, timing is everything, especially on TikTok. Don't spend your time posting content during the day. Spend your time posting content, even if you're scheduling it in advance, between 7 and 8, even 7 to 9 p.m., your time zone. Especially on TikTok, because TikTok wants to see what your content does, what your video does within the first 60 minutes of it posting. Okay, I went from 0 followers to 65,000 followers, posting 3, maybe 4 times a week, but it's about the timing you post. I would always, like 95% of the time, I would post it between 7 and 8 p.m. And I would do it live. I wouldn't schedule it out. I don't even know if there is a schedule for TikTok. I'm sure there is by now. I would schedule it live. I would record it earlier, 10-second video of me swinging around out by the Great Salt Lake or, something like this where you're popping in and out of the screen. Just something really simple. Record a video really simple. You can record multiple of them at a time. And then when you post on TikTok or even make a reel on Instagram or Facebook, you take that short video and you just put words over it. So it might say something like this. Did you know that fibromyalgia might be caused by bacterial infections? And you can learn exactly if you're fighting one right now. Go grab your blood work. Look for this number called neutrophils. If it's over 60%, you're fighting a bacterial infection that's causing your joint pain, chronic fatigue, and insomnia, aka fibromyalgia. Something like that. Boom, done. Okay, here's another example. The most common cause of chronic fatigue is not your thyroid or even your adrenals. It's a low-grade viral infection. How do you know if you're fighting one? Go grab your blood work. Look for this number called lymphocytes. If it's above 30%, you're fighting a low-grade viral infection, and that's what's causing your fatigue. Done. Okay. Tip number 2. Pick one platform. If you don't know where to start, just pick one. And pick the one where your audience is. Okay. Now, my favorite platform is Facebook, just because that's the platform I'm familiar with. That's the only platform I'm on personally, and I've been on there since the beginning, like 2008, which is ridiculous because that's 14 years. I think so, because I was a senior in high school then. So Facebook is my favorite. It's just because it's the most familiar to me, but it's also where my audience is. And that's where I began with social media in my practice. I only did Facebook for like the first 3 years. I got all of my clientele from Facebook until finally I succumbed to the podcasting world. My husband had told me over and over and over again, you need to start a podcast. You need to start a podcast. One, I don't listen to podcasts. I still don't really listen to podcasts. But 2, the technology freaked me out. I have to have all this fancy audio equipment. I don't even know what I would talk about. It's a time commitment to be able to commit to all these episodes. So hosting a podcast is another story. It's probably my favorite thing to do, honestly, because I get to meet people from all over the world. In fact, I'm going to sneak peek in this one. If it hasn't released already, Maddie Lansdowne is a huge podcaster. He runs one of the top alternative health podcasts called How to Not Get Sick and Die. I had my interview with him yesterday for my podcast. He lives in Australia, Melbourne. And let me just tell you that we've been lied to. He's been fired. His colleague, his MD colleague, has been fired, all because the media was staging COVID hospitalizations at the hospital he was working in. So what did they do? Well, he and a colleague got on Facebook Live and showed them what was really going on. And of course, the Facebook Live went viral and they lost their jobs. That's okay because he's born for way better things. So that episode's coming on. You're going to meet cool people like this, but it's a very strict time commitment. I dedicate days to creating content for you guys. But again, it's my favorite thing in the world. And now it's where I get a lot of my clientele from. So that's the podcast world. There's some tips about where to start. Start with where your audience is and where you're most comfortable. And then don't move or branch out until you're building clientele from that platform. Like I said, I was on Facebook for 3 years before I even did anything else. And I didn't get on Instagram or TikTok until like, I don't know, 10 months ago. I just didn't jump over to those platforms because, again, it's a time commitment. Okay. If you're not on TikTok, if you're shrugging TikTok off because, it's only 20-year-olds that dance, you're dead wrong. Everybody is on TikTok now. And if you post a reel or a TikTok video like I just mapped out with you with the fibro and the neutrophils and the chronic fatigue and the viruses, you will go viral. This is tip number 3. No matter what platform you're on, a 12-year-old needs to understand what you're saying. Nobody gets on social media and wants to have to think. They don't want to have to see a word inside your social media content and have to look it up. No one's going to do that. Except when you're talking about blood work. I should back that up. Because people are like, wait a second, what does my blood work say? I'm going to go find out. And then they post comments on there like, my neutrophils are at 68%. My neutrophils are at 42%. You'll get tons and tons of comments on it like that. Now, as far as a rule of thumb about getting into comments and replying to them, I have tried hiring 3 different people for social media. In fact, I even hired an agency. None of them have panned out. There's a few different reasons why, and there's different reasons for each platform, but basically, people are harsh, especially on TikTok. They don't give a crap about hurting your feelings. And remember, this is a problem on them, on the inside of them. It has nothing to do with you. Okay. In fact, I wanted to address this in a different episode, but tidbit right here. Because you get some haters, remember, you're challenging their way of life. You're challenging the fact that they don't need to live with whatever disease they've been told they have to live with and suffer from and benefit from. Let's face it. There are people who benefit from being sick. And you're challenging the fact that they don't have to manage or benefit from this. They can actually, go back to work and live a healthy and ordinary life. You're challenging the status quo. So it's not about you, or it's not about your authority or who has authority to read blood work. It's about them. So remember that. You get the haters on social media and even inside your live workshops. Okay, so remember, 3 tips to social media, maximizing it. The first tip, time is everything. When you post prime time between 7 and 9 p.m. in your time zone. Doesn't matter. Number 2, pick one platform and rock it until you've got clientele coming in like crazy from it before you branch out. And then number 3, make sure your content is very understandable, not by you, not by me, not by our other colleagues. Make sure you're speaking the language they understand. A 12-year-old can understand. Okay, let me grill this in just a little bit more. My husband's a roofer. He owns his own roofing business. And I was helping him with flyers, marketing flyers that he was going to take around to houses. And on the flyer, he originally had something like, I can't even tell you the words because it was totally his language. It was like, hey, do you need your gutters cleaned out? Or something, like I said, I can't tell you the language, something broken or whatever it was. And I looked at him and I said, Andrew, I like it, but I don't even know what the heck that is. And I'm your wife. I hear you talking about this stuff all the time. All it needs to say is, does your roof have a problem? Because someone like me can go out and look at my roof and say, oh, yeah, I've got a shingle missing, or, oh, yeah, it just looks old. It needs to be that dumb, that simple, and that short. Does your roof have a problem? Is it getting old? Does it need a replace? Do you need a repair? Don't use language that a 12-year-old doesn't understand. That's key. Because again, people are flipping through social media mindlessly, wasting time. They don't want to have to think. Well, don't make them think. Now, YouTube is a different story. Speaking of YouTube, people go to YouTube to learn, right? It's like the number one searching platform outside of Google. But people go to YouTube to learn. So I'm just barely starting on YouTube. We've been doing YouTube for 6 months now. And this is where these podcast video episodes can be found. But it's tricky because it's saturated. And figuring out the algorithm that's always changing can be difficult. But if you like videos, definitely run with it. I've had several marketing experts say that YouTube's the way to go for organic traffic. Like I said, I've barely been on YouTube. So for me, that's not the case. For me, it's been this podcast. Now, speaking of podcasts, yeah, I was going to give you some more golden nuggets too. I caution you on hosting a podcast. But that being said, it's my favorite thing that I do. I highly recommend and encourage being a podcast guest because you get to leverage other people's networks. Okay, so I was on Maddie Lansdowne's podcast a month ago, is when my episode aired. We talked about lab work and blood work, of course. And I gave the call to action as people can go buy my book. Again, his podcast is huge. And I really don't keep track of the numbers because I don't care about the numbers. So I haven't even looked to see what the sales total is for the Amazon. But I was able to get onto his podcast for 45 minutes of my time and leverage all 150 downloads per month his podcast get. That's the power of being a podcast guest, is that we need them. As a host, I need guests to come on my platforms and make me content for my podcast. So if you're stuck on where to begin with guesting on podcasts, there's a Facebook group called Podcast Collaboration, something like that. Last I checked, I think there were almost 40,000 people in it. Whether you're a host or a guest, you can submit yourself on a Facebook post, a regular Facebook post within that group, and a guest or a host like myself can reach out and book you for my show. So that's a very simple, easy place to start, and it's free. There's a paid subscription version with it, but just start with the Facebook group for free. That's what I did in all of 2020 and all of 21 to build my audience because it's free. It's just leveraging your time and leveraging someone else's networks. So if I were to say, if you're just going to get started in one place, don't worry about starting in social media because the algorithms change all the freaking time. And I would say 2 to 5% of your following actually sees your content. So be careful about where you're spending your time with social media. If you get into my TikTok feed, you will see that I rarely comment. And people have noted. Have you guys noticed that she never comments? Well, no freaking duh, I don't comment. I don't have time for it. And you guys are all jerks. Not all of you, but some of you. the ones who really want your care. And I will tell you this, I have had several blood work labs come through where they found me on TikTok. Now I'd go from TikTok and I would send people to my Facebook, or sorry, that's a lie. I would send people to this podcast from TikTok. And say, hey, if you want to learn more, go join my podcast, Beyond the Diagnosis with Dr. Kylie. Or better yet, if you're really wondering about your labs, I have this free blood work cheat guide. Go download it. And now I got people on my email list. I probably have 1,500 people from TikTok on my email list. And that's because I stopped commenting several months ago and I haven't even posted in the last 2 months, 3 months, maybe even on TikTok. I love the podcast so much. It's been such great traction for me. This is where I choose to spend my time. So 1, where do you love to be? Where do you love to create content? 2, get on podcast as a guest. That's the best thing you can do. Smartest thing with your time. All right. That's a wrap.